Welcome to Living Life in the End for the Successful and Fulfilled Woman. I am your host, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes, the Liberated Lawyer. I help women to get everything they desire in life by equipping them with powerful strategies to achieve the fulfillment they desire and deserve. Who said you can't have it all? Clearly, they did not know about living life in the end. When women make powerful decisions and create great strategies, they can have everything they desire in life. Girlfriend, forget about choosing between being successful or fulfilled. You can be successful and fulfilled. It's time. It's time for you to get everything you desire and deserve. It's time for you to live your life on purpose. It's time for you to live a life that is fulfilled, meaningful, and full of joy. It's time for you to walk boldly in the power of your decisions. If you are going to be in this world, you need to be fulfilled in this life. Life is too long to be unfulfilled. Join me for another episode of Living Life in the End, where you learn how to live fulfilled, fit, and free. It's time for another episode of Living Life in the End, our Living LITA series. You know, it's hard to operate in the and when society tries to put us in the box of or. Women constantly face the division of woman or wife, mother, lover, or career woman rather than the celebration of the trinity of woman and wife, mother, lover, and career woman. All in one person, one woman, yet many. We must learn to build a life in the and. We can't operate in the or. We operate in the A and B. Living life in the and helps women to truly have it all. The Living Life in the And series is to help women show how they can have it all. I love to have provocative conversations with women doing great things in the world. Women on every continuum of the spectrum: housewives, skilled workers, professionals, and executives, and everything in between. Not only is this a great conversation, but a quest for the Holy Grail. What does a successful life mean to the modern day woman? We get up close and personal on how these women are living their lives in the end. Are you ready? Are you ready to live life in the end and get everything in life you deserve? Let's get it. As always, I am excited about our guests, and today I'm excited to have Wendy Alexander. Girlfriends, we are in for a treat. Before we jump into this conversation with a purpose, let me tell you a little bit about Wendy Alexander. Wendy is an interviewer and career coach who helps people look so good that hiring managers can't ignore them. She was stuck once, not knowing how to get out of a financial and emotional mess after a relationship breakup left her a broke, single mom drowning in debt. But things changed when she changed. She invested in herself and found mentors and a supportive community to turn her mess into her success. And there's been plenty of hiccups along the way. From growing up a woman of color in apartheid South Africa to being held up at gunpoint in her first job in Australia, and more than her fair share of health challenges, she's beat them all. And now she runs her own company on her own terms and helps professional people fearlessly get the job they want, negotiate the income they want, and ultimately the lifestyle they want. Wendy, welcome to Living Life in the End.
Hello there. How are you? Are you well?
Oh, I am fabulous, just fabulous. And I am so excited that we are finally getting a chance to have our full conversation today. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to meet you prior to our actual recording, and I'm so excited to share your rich history and wisdom with our guests. And of course, during my reading of the bio, rather, I shared about you growing up in apartheid South Africa. And so I would just like to start out by learning more about that experience and just allowing you to just share a little bit about who is the real Wendy Alexander.
Okay, so South Africa. Yes, I grew up in Cape Town in South Africa during the heart of the apartheid era. And those who know anything about that, you can probably liken it to the civil rights movement in the South of America. So it was a segregated society. It was entrenched in the laws that blacks lived in these neighborhoods, coloreds, which is what I am, lived in these neighborhoods, and white folk lived in these neighborhoods. So there was very little opportunity for blacks and colored people because though the white people were the minority in the country, they held the most wealth. And so all great places, all the great neighborhoods, the great cinemas, the great beaches, restaurants, all of that was kind of in favor of the white people. And we, I suppose, the colored people got the next lot of what you would call good restaurants, good cinemas, good places to live. And then there were the black townships. Now, I didn't know that I was living in a segregated society until I was about 7 years old. Because as a child, you don't know that. You
Right.
surrounded by your community and you see people that look like you and you see the neighbors and you just think that's the way it is. And so my first encounter with segregation and apartheid and what that meant for me as a child of color was at the age of about 7. We, my family and another family, we went to a beach in an area called Gordon's Bay in Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a fairly remote beach. So there wasn't a lot of signs because this is the other thing. Dotted around South Africa were all the signs that told you what you could and couldn't do and where you could and couldn't go.
Mm-hmm.
This beach didn't have any signs, or we certainly didn't see it and notice it. So we was like, oh, it's a remote beach. Went onto the beach. Probably were there for about half an hour, I'd say, and then suddenly 2 policemen appeared
Mm.
and pointed out, and the sign was quite a distance from the parking lot, so we hadn't seen it, and in no uncertain terms told us we had to leave the beach. So I'm a young child, and I'm like, what's going on? All I see is the adults around me get incredibly tense, and I'm thinking, I can feel something's wrong, but I don't know what's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And so then we get in the cars, we get off the beach, and while we're driving home, I'm being the curious inquisitive child I was even back then, I start hammering my parents with questions. What's going on? Why can't we be on that beach? And then as we drove off the beach, I saw the sign. The
Mm.
sign said whites only.
Mm.
And I was like, what does this mean? Dad wouldn't answer any of my questions. I remember him saying in the car, can you just be quiet for once in your life? Can you just be quiet? And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, he's always loved my curious mind. You know, he was reading
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare to me when I was young and all of that. And I was like, why is he telling me to be quiet? But when we got home, we were in the safety of our home. Then he started to answer my questions about what apartheid meant, how it was entrenched in the laws, that our neighborhood was the neighborhood that we were designated to live in, and all of these things. Um, and I have to say, I found it very difficult to process that. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime, and I noticed that was something that occurred even when I was younger. I used to write. I used to write little poetry or little short stories. It was always my way to process. So I
Mm-hmm.
started to
Mm-hmm.
write a lot of things like asking questions, but nobody was really answering it, except when we were in the safety of our homes. My father would explain certain things to me. My father himself was going into the black townships to teach the black people to read and write because illiteracy was a big problem in those communities. And so, but a lot of these things were done undercover, kind of
Mm-hmm.
clandestine activity, right? Um,
Right.
And so I'm growing up with all of this. And then my dad starts saying to us as we get older, he says, you guys are going to have to work twice as hard to get an education. If you want any opportunity in this country, you're going to have to get top grades. You're going to have to try and win scholarships because the opportunity just doesn't exist for you, and less so even for the Black people in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is running through my head. And what I remember was, I was like, when I look back on it now, I remember feeling like a grown up in a young person's body. I just felt like I
Mm-hmm.
grew up too fast. It was almost like I lost the childhood because I became a
Mm-hmm.
very serious child,
Mm-hmm.
started to read and study and wanting to know all that I could about what was going on in my country. Also entering a phase when I got to the teenage years, I entered that phase of dark rebellion, anger, and wrote a
Mm-hmm.
lot of dark poetry. Like I still read some of the poetry I wrote back in the day. I'm like, wow, you were a dark kid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was the background, and so I did work really hard to win, and I did win a scholarship to go to the University of Cape Town. Was one of the only Black or women of color in some of my classes. So there were some classes where I had other colored students in the class with me, but a lot of the ones I attended, I was the only colored
Mm-hmm.
student. And
Mm-hmm.
you feel the resentment there as well, because it's like, this
Mm-hmm.
is a prestigious university. You don't belong here. What are you doing here? And most of them would have known I would have won a scholarship to go there
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also an isolating time. So I suppose you could say, overcoming obstacles at a young age and
Yes.
having to navigate many barriers,
Mm-hmm.
growing up in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And it left its scars. Like
Yes.
there are scars that you carry around with you, at least for me, for the earlier part of my young adult life.
Mm-hmm.
There's self-esteem scars, there's self-worth scars, all of those things, and you constantly questioning yourself. I noticed that I shielded myself from a lot of interaction with white people,
Mm-hmm.
didn't trust them at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was when I came to Australia, there were some really beautiful people that I met, but I didn't really open myself up to them because it was like,
Mm-hmm.
for me, you look like that, that means I can't trust you.
Right. Because of
And that's
the
quite
side.
limiting.
Mhm.
When you walk around with those scars, you can walk around also with the limitations that come with that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And opportunities that you don't always grab because you don't trust.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so migrating to Australia was another challenge, not so much because I was encountering any of that bigotry or that racial discrimination or anything like that. It was trying to get used to a country where I was suddenly free to go and do whatever I wanted. I could go into any restaurant, I
Mm-hmm.
could go into any cinema, I could go to any university. And
Mm-hmm.
I will say, Australia back in those days was like the golden city for education because education was largely free.
Mm-hmm.
You paid a certain fee and you had to get your books and whatever material you needed for whatever course you were taking, but fundamentally it was free. So
Mm-hmm.
education for me in my second year of university, which I did at Monash University in Melbourne, um, was something like $250 was the
That's
fee,
wow.
right? $250 plus I
That's
had
the
to
cost
pay.
of a book here in America. An American college campus, you can literally pay $250 just for one book.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And look, that's not the way now. It has
Right.
become quite expensive to go to university now. But I
Mm-hmm.
was fortunate in that I largely gained my education, the remaining years of my education for free, right?
Mm-hmm.
I worked a
Mm-hmm.
couple of jobs, was waitressing and all of that too, because when you migrate from from a country like South Africa, you're not allowed to take a lot of money with you. So there was
Right.
all that
Right.
limitation as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we pretty much sold the house, and dad and mum brought the 5 kids out here, and we had enough money to put a deposit on a house. That was it. My father
Mm-hmm.
said right from the start, all of you kids have to go find a part-time job. If you want to study further, you're going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to figure out a way to make it happen. So we did, and we held our little part-time jobs alongside our full-time study.
Studies, right,
So
right.
that was really the start for me. The start for me was about facing obstacles from a very young age,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
And you know, I want to go back to one thing just for our audience's sake, because you use terms to describe ethnicity probably in a way that we don't in America. You use the term black, colored, white, and of course, it's very obvious what white is. But is there a difference in South Africa between black and colored, or are those two terms interchangeable?
No, so coloreds were classified the way by their ethnicity, which means, so in my case, you're colored if you have some white lineage and some black lineage. So both my grandmothers were white, and then
Mm-hmm.
there was the black. So there was interracial marriage or
Mm-hmm.
interracial relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's how you get classified as colored. You're a mixed race person,
Mm-hmm.
biracial person, but you're called colored. My birth certificate says Cape colored. So that's how I'm
Mm-hmm.
classified. And then you have black, where someone who comes from what you would call a tribal
Mm-hmm.
ethnicity. So the tribes of South Africa, and there are many, that's how they were classified. And we all look different. Like you can see that my skin is lighter, but that's because there's
Right.
there's that mixed race.
Right.
But fundamentally, your privileges, your access to education, your access to opportunity amounted to almost the same. Although I will
Mhm.
say the blacks less so, because they were confined to townships. And in
Mm,
South Africa, you couldn't leave your township unless you got a permission pass to leave your
mhm,
township, which means they only got to go to the big cities to work and get opportunities. And in South Africa, it was largely around the mining industry. So we've got one of the biggest gold mines in the world, biggest diamond
mhm,
mines. And they used blacks as cheap labor
mhm,
in those mines. So then blacks had to carry a pass, which meant they
mhm,
had permission to leave the townships, go into the towns and into the mining towns, and became the cheap labor in the mining, because that was
mhm,
a big industry in South Africa. But if you were caught in areas outside of those areas that you had permission to go into, you were jailed, right?
mhm,
Things like that happened. It was extreme segregation. And
mhm.
I suppose worse than that, it was part of the laws of South Africa. So how do you fight something that's entrenched in law,
Right,
right? So we certainly perfected the segregation movement in South Africa.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. So yes, because I think earlier this year I read Trevor Noah's book Born a Crime, and of course, he shares the experiences of his life and the fact that literally his birth was criminal
Yes.
because of his parents. His mom is a black, and his dad was, I think, German or Austrian, but
Mm.
literally that relationship was criminal, and his birth was a crime. But it was very interesting to hear his perspective of growing up and looking at parallels, if you will,
Yeah.
to American life during the Jim Crow
Yeah.
era. And we can all hope that there will not be any type of resurgence or resemblance to that type of segregation being entrenched, as you mentioned, in law. So,
Yeah.
but I wanted to just for the benefit of the audience to hear those distinctions and to know how it differs slightly from how we use those terms here in America to
Yeah.
refer to
Yeah.
people of African descent. But yes,
Yeah.
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 So one of the things that you mentioned is that when you became aware of the environment in which you were living and the restrictions and how the life you knew as just being in your community became exposed to be a life that was restricted because of, if you will, your community. And you mentioned that you became kind of more serious, and that shaped, who you are today. Um, of course, it's hard to know what would have happened had you been in another situation, but I often wonder how our obstacles shape us, and how we are able to take something that is negative, the obstacles, the restrictions, the realities of living in that type of environment, and how we translate that into a driving force. And so, was that a conscious kind of decision that you made to kind of use that negative situation as a driving force, or do you think it was just a progression of dealing with that environment, if you will?
I think it's a combination of the two, actually. And also conversations, open conversations with our parents. So my parents always encouraged us from a very young age to never become victims of anything.
Mhm.
Life, finances, circumstances, limitations. My
Mhm.
father was orphaned at age 4. So he grew up in an orphanage.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he certainly was on the streets for a time in his life, and so on and so on. But he would share the stories of how he was always determined to make something of his life. And eventually, Dad got into accounting, and he was working for some good companies and things like that. So what I noticed growing up was that my dad, despite all the obstacles against him, he never let that stop him from going forward, from being
Mhm.
what he
Mhm.
chose to be in life. And
Mhm.
he used to be quite stern with us about becoming victims in life. So if we started
Mhm.
speaking victim language and saying, "Oh, I'm never going to have an opportunity because I'm a person of color or the color of my skin or whatever," Dad would literally, and he would try and smack that out of you. He'd have these very
Mhm.
stern and my father could lecture, right? He's we
Mhm.
had a joke in the family like, "Oh, you didn't want to be on the receiving end of Dad's lectures because he would lecture you for ages, and bore you with the lecturing." But his whole thing was,
Mhm.
don't become a victim of whatever circumstances you're growing up in. So I suppose that would be part of the training,
Mhm.
that being
Mhm.
instilled in me. And then me looking, I was reading some of Dr. Maya Angelou's work as well.
Mhm.
And I do remember her saying things like, you can choose your attitude in life. You
Mhm.
can become, this can happen to you, and you can choose to let it define you, or you can choose a different attitude, an attitude of success, an attitude of overcoming, an attitude of becoming what you want to be despite that.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I was reading, and I was reading, the works of Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, even though that was banned in South Africa. But when something's banned, it finds a way to get out most
Right.
people.
Right.
The minute they ban anything, everybody wants to read it. And so, and I looked at Mandela's life, and I was thinking, this guy's sitting in a prison cell, and he's still able to influence people. He's still able to inspire people.
Mhm.
So I suppose it was the heroes of the day, the Stephen Bikos, Nelson Mandela,
Mhm.
all of those, my own father, and what he kept instilling in us.
Mhm.
And then, my dad always said to me, "You, from the time you were born, you were cheeky, you were feisty." So maybe that was an innate part of the personality as
Right.
well.
Right.
That willingness to keep driving forward and not to take no for an answer. But
Mhm.
I will say that it wasn't easy.
Right.
There are times when you feel like giving up because it just feels like the deck is stacked against you, you know,
Mhm.
all the time. Um, but if I had any bit of advice to give to anybody, it's like, if you want to be whatever it is that you want to be, find a way to be that. Because I don't think the soul enjoys peace, serenity, any kind of joy anytime you become a victim of anything.
Mhm.
There's always something holding you back, and deep down inside, you know it. You
Right,
know,
right,
and
right.
so I think we have to be the masters of our own destiny. And I learned that through some of the reading material that I was reading at a young age.
Mhm.
And I was like, no, I'm going to keep going forward. I was a rebel, so I became a political activist in South Africa for a while. But
Mhm.
what I saw through that was that it was a lot of angry emotion
Mhm.
driving me
Mhm.
all the time.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, was not very productive. It wasn't
Mhm.
getting us the results. We were out there marching. We were out there fighting against the police. There was stone throwing. People were
Mhm.
dying in the struggle. And in the end, it was like, man, we're losing so many people. What good is this? There's got to be a different way. And I was noticing that my father's way, which was my dad's motto, was educate people one person at a time. And he
Mhm.
did that on both sides of the fence. So he worked in white corporations and he would be educating them on how to treat black people and how to get better productivity out of people. He would be teaching his white bosses certain ways to communicate with their workers. But then he was also going into the black townships and uplifting numeracy and literacy.
Mm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
dad's motto was education is empowering.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
don't want to be walking around in life without certain skills, because how do you then fight back? And how
Right.
do you gain financial resources to fight back? There's a level of education required to do that. And I started to notice that his method was a lot more effective than mine.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
I did rebel for a good few years. I
Mhm.
was
Right.
one of those marching and making a lot of noise and getting tear gassed and getting shot at and you name it. And then eventually I was like, this is not that effective. And so I also started to go down that education pathway, educating myself, speaking to people, engaging in conversation, um, often engaging in conversation with the enemy, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
Because how do you influence an enemy if you're constantly fighting against them?
Right.
Yeah, so it
Well,
was it was changing my mindset
mhm.
that helped quite a bit.
Right. Yes, and that's so apropos that we're having this conversation in the background of the recent election, of course, here in America, as we all brace
Yeah.
the changes that we know are imminent in with the next administration, and wondering, how that will affect us. And of course, just even looking at just some of the rhetoric and some of the promises that they are that there will be an opportunity to actually bring to honor, or to bring to reality. And I have personally been in a kind of fog, if you will, since Tuesday, and really oscillating between fear and anger and uncertainty, and all of the emotions that come along as we think about how America is changing and regressing in many respects. Um, Even though, the underlying reasons are supposed to be tied to policy improvements that are going to make the economy better, whatever. But we know that there are some uh, impacts that will um, be regressive in terms of how people of color, in particular, or women, are treated here in this country. And I've really been looking at the question of how how you know
Mm,
how am I going to continue to make the impact I've done thus far, if whatever change happens, and just kind of, the how do we make turn this obstacle
mm,
into an opportunity. And listening to you, um, you know the your father's message really resonates around the importance of education from a perspective of um, creating relationships that allow people to connect in a more genuine way and really to connect in a more human way
Yeah.
rather than looking at one side or the other as as an enemy or someone that can't be trusted, looking at each other as human beings who have commonalities. So I think we all will need to tap into that resilience and that activism, because you make a very great point. Activism is not always angry, and definitely does not always need to be violent. And there are ways to push for change that are kind of like the analogy of boiling the frog. There's some
Yeah.
ways that are in people's faces and it's very obvious. This is activism, this is opposition, this is confrontation. And then there are other ways that take longer
Yeah.
but accomplish the same thing, in the end. So I do thank you for
Yeah.
sharing, that experience of growing up in apartheid South Africa. And I remember when Nelson Mandela was freed. I remember when I became conscious even that apartheid existed. And much like you, I grew up in the Mississippi Delta,
Yeah.
which remained segregated, honestly, until 2020. There's still spots in Mississippi that remain segregated. And I grew up segregated and didn't realize it. I grew up in
Yeah.
Cleveland, Mississippi, and it never dawned on me that I lived in a segregated community. All my neighbors were Black. And these were just my friends. This is just where I lived, and it wasn't odd to me necessarily that Cypress Park Elementary was probably 99% Black. I don't even remember any white students at Cypress Park. I don't remember having white classmates again until junior high when I moved to Cleveland. I mean, moved to Greenville, Mississippi,
Mm.
which was less segregated. But Cleveland, Mississippi was segregated. The
Yeah.
high schools were just the Cleveland Public Schools District, or Cleveland School District, whatever it's called, was just literally desegregated finally in 2020, literally
So that's 4 years ago,
4
right?
years ago. Right. So up until 2020, there still was a black set of schools, and the uh, and there was a set of schools that were formerly all white, but since Brown versus Board of Education, when the desegregation happened in America, the the schools were more diverse, but definitely that's where all of the white students went, because the town itself, there still was a black side and a white side.
And a
Literally was
white
a
side.
railroad track still.
Yep.
It literally was a
Yep.
railroad track. Of course, we didn't have the literal restrictions. You could go to either side of the town, but it never really dawned on me until I was older that I was leaving kind of my area and going into the white people's areas.
Area. Yeah.
Um, and but that's just something, like you say, as a child, you're unaware of it because your community shields you in many
Correct.
respects,
Absolutely. Yeah. I
right?
will say
And
something about, that anger and that feeling of hopelessness that people have, especially probably since Tuesday. If you want inspiration, look to someone like Nelson Mandela, because he
mhm,
was imprisoned for 27 years
yes,
and he came out. And one of the first things he said, and I actually have a charcoal drawing of him on my wall in my lounge room. And the quote on it says, I knew that if I didn't leave that hatred and that anger behind, I would be forever be imprisoned.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
this is the thing we need to remember, that hating our enemy and trying to keep that perpetual cycle of hatred and division
Mhm.
is never going to bring the healing. And
Right.
fundamentally, at the end of the day, all humans, even the ones that seem like they're crazy, want safety for their children,
Mhm.
want serenity, want good jobs, and all of these things. Fundamentally, we have a lot more in common than we
Absolutely.
actually have that divides us. And I think um, people need to focus, zone in on that, and understand that if someone like Mandela, who actually was imprisoned for his beliefs for a long
Mhm. Mhm.
could come out and understand that the way forward for healing for the country and for unification of the country was forgiveness and was having the conversations with the people that you may have viewed as enemies and didn't really want to have the conversations with,
Mhm.
was the only way forward. It is the only way forward. And I've certainly seen that in my life. Like, I'm in my current partner is a white man, right?
Mhm.
However, I would not date white men for a lot of years
Mhm.
because I was
Mhm.
afraid of them.
Mhm. Mhm.
One, was afraid of them, didn't trust them, all of these things. And then this guy comes along in my life, and I'm like trying to avoid this person like the plague. But I notice this is the person that's stepping up behind me. This is the person that's elevating me, that's helping me grow as a woman, and all of that, and tearing down every barrier that I've put in my head about this particular race.
Mhm.
Um, and I was like, hang on a minute, life is not as black and white, pardon the
Mhm.
pun,
Mhm. Yeah,
as
right.
we think it is. And
Mhm.
in fact, when we calling to grow and, as you say, live in the and
Mhm.
not the all, you need to expand the mind to be able to do that. You have got to tear down your own biases.
Right.
And I find that I'm constantly having to do that because the thing is, when I go through difficult times, if I encounter racism, and my daughter's father was an African American man, so she's got the wild afro, she's a dark girl,
Mhm.
and has certainly gone through the bullying and the
Mhm.
racial discrimination, even
Mhm.
here in free Australia, right? It happens
Mhm.
everywhere.
Right.
I've
Right.
traveled all over the world, and I have certainly encountered
Mhm.
levels of racism in every country I've traveled to.
Mhm.
Um, but what I noticed was like you can either define yourself by that and let it continue to hit at your heart all the time and build this wall around you and operate in zones of anger or frustration or fear all the time, or you have to move through that and constantly remind yourself that that is in fact that person's issue.
Right.
Someone who's giving racial slurs to you, say that is their limitation. That is
Mhm.
not your limitation. And the more
Right.
you're going to limit yourself as a person and put yourself in these boxes that society wants to put us in anyway, you're never going to be able to expand. You expand to a point, but then you can't go beyond that point.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I can say it is bloody hard.
Right. 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 Yes.
It's
Yes. And it's
hard to do
right.
some days because the trauma of the past comes up, the scars of the past come up, all the hurts of the past come up, and then you have to navigate it. I'm finding almost on a daily basis, I have to check my internal biases and have to question, is this coming from the trauma that I know I've
Mhm.
experienced that will always be with me, which means I've got to navigate myself out of that trauma and come from an empowered place? Or is it coming from an inherent bias that I have? Because I know I have them as well,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then the other part, which is I call it the stuff you. I'm not letting this limit me. I'm going to do what I need to do anyway.
Right. Right.
And always I'm trying to get myself to the stuff you part and saying, okay, so I got all these obstacles, and the laws say this, and the new leader does this, and they've got all this rhetoric and so. But am I going to let that define me and the way forward and the life that I want to live? And fundamentally, the activism is still in me, but my activism is towards healing and peace and serenity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that does not get achieved with continued anger, frustration, victimhood, all of these things. It actually gets achieved with the very difficult conversation of stepping
Mm-hmm.
powerfully into enemy territory,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Because, I have been thinking, like I say, oscillating in all of these emotions. And, on the one hand, thinking of, good gracious, how soon can I get out of America? And
You can always
then on
come
the
here.
other hand, right, and then on the other hand, how am I going to stay here and fight? And I use fight, very broadly, and hopefully not having to literally fight, but it's as you mentioned. First of all, racism is everywhere in the world.
Yep. You don't
It's
escape it.
everywhere. You can't escape it, and how it is supported or not by the law differs, obviously, because some countries, it may be actually supported by law, or as it was with apartheid, the law.
Yes.
And then other places, just culturally, it
Yep.
remains so. And of course, there are pockets that are more diverse in mindset and ethnicity, and more open in that respect. And as you mentioned, even in free Australia, as you describe it, your
Yeah.
daughter experienced racism, and other people of color do as well. And even in Australia, you have the tensions between the Aborigines
Correct.
and
There's a
those who
dark
have.
history in Australia as
Right,
well,
right.
right?
So we can't escape it,
No, we
is the
can't.
point. We can't escape it. So we have to be resilient and really be committed to turning these obstacles into opportunities, whether it is
Yeah.
through education,
Yeah.
whether it is through building relationships, and finding ways to overcome these very human experiences
Yeah.
that materialize as racist, bigoted, sexist, all of the ists,
Yes,
isms
correct.
that are out there, in finding ways that we focus more on the commonality than on the differences. And, just earlier today, I read a post, and I've been limiting my social media purposefully, this
Yeah.
week, to not just be inundated, so that I can manage my emotions in a healthy way.
Yes.
But I read a post, Instagram post earlier today, and someone was defending why they voted for Trump, and and kind of laid out all of these reasons. And when you look at the reasons, they're quote valid reasons, some economic, something another, just this and this they want for the economy. And all right, okay, you can desire that, but everything comes at a price. And as I was saying to someone, to someone I was speaking with earlier this week, is that anytime you suppress a portion of the economy, you weaken the overall economy. So
Yeah.
I can never really understand the logic in saying that we want a strong economy, we want to bring the cost of living down, so we're going to do something that oppresses this portion of society in a way that they can't fully participate in the economy and they can't fully contribute to the economy, and it overall it stifles the economy.
Mm.
And certainly when policies are implemented in a way or policies and laws are implemented in a way that suppress certain parts of society in a way that they can't participate, um, it has it stems ultimately from the scarcity mentality
Yeah.
that there's not enough. And abundance mentality always recognizes that there is enough because there's a possibility of creating more. And as we
Yeah.
see in nature, nature always evolves to be able to kind of handle, I suppose, whatever is happening in the environment, whatever is happening in from a biological perspective. Nature adapts, and I
Yeah.
believe humans can adapt should they
Canada.
desire to. And it's only when they choose not to adapt that you again kind of resort, or not you, but that society can resort to this oppression
Yeah.
and the idea that, well, in order for me to have more, I have to suppress this sector over here, rather than recognizing that when all parts of of society are able to participate fully, it's kind of like, what is it about the ships? The all I always mess up anacronyms, but
A
the
rising
oh,
tide raises
there you
all
go.
boats.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I tell you, that's one thing I will mess up a saying in a minute. I don't know why I can't even put it together. But anyway, you said it. But
Yeah.
my point being is that when we create opportunities for everyone to participate, inevitably it strengthens the economy as a whole. And these
That's right.
policies, things that we do that keep people from making money, you know, actually hurt the economy more. And this is the last thing I'll say because I don't want to get all off on politics. But my point is just around resilience and turning obstacles into opportunity.
Opportunities. That's
But
right.
when we don't ensure that everyone is educated, literally educated, that hurts the economy the worst, because if you don't have education and you aren't able to build a skill and you aren't able to have a skill that allows you to make a living wage and allows
Yeah.
you to take care of yourself, well, then that's when crime rises. But anyway,
Yeah.
lest
Yeah.
I digress. Lest I digress. So, I do want to kind of shift gears and talk about your transition to Australia, because you mentioned that you and your family moved to Australia, and that's where you currently reside. And I'd love to just hear more about your experience with starting over, because you started over as a family
Yes.
and then you have created your own life in this new space, and then you've had some other opportunities to start over. And so I would just like to spend some time talking about starting over
Starting over.
and how to do
Okay.
that, and yes.
So starting over in Australia, as I said, was quite a challenge, and that was where a lot of the mental and mindset work had to happen. Because I'll give you an example. One time I was going into the city with my cousin, who had been living in Australia 5 years prior to us.
Hmm.
So she had a chance. She had that chance to adapt, but we were new. We were only a couple of months. And she
Hmm.
said, "Let's go into the city. I'm going to show you Melbourne City." And we go into the city, and we at the train station, and the train pulls in, and I say to her, "Which carriage am I allowed to get on?" And she goes, "You're not in South Africa anymore."
Hmm.
And so that gives you an insight into the mindset. The mindset hadn't shifted.
Shifted, right? You were
It was
free,
still looking for the
right?
restrictions and the
Hmm.
limitations and all these other things. And then I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I even said that." But it
Hmm.
took a while, and it wasn't just for me, my siblings as well. All of us struggled to adapt to the
To
life in
freedom.
Australia,
Yeah.
to freedom.
Yeah.
And all of us, all five of us, I have four siblings, two sisters, two brothers. There were moments when we said we want to go back to South Africa. Now, we had been trying for years to get out of the country,
Yeah.
like 10 years. We're out of the country. We're living in this great country, and we want to go back. So, and that happened in the first uh, 6 to 12 months.
Mhm.
So that tells you that it's not so easy. People think that when you migrate, oh, you got freedom and wow, the gold, the streets are paved with gold, and suddenly all this opportunity.
Mhm.
That is not so. And even if that is the case, even if there are a lot of opportunity, you yourself need to heal from what you've just come from.
Mhm.
And so that was the first journey, the first overcoming, the first part of starting over was to heal those wounds, or to try and understand those wounds and begin
Mhm.
the healing process around that. Having said that, I not long after I was here, probably a year, 18 months after I was here, I met my daughter's father. And he was an African American male who had been raised in Harlem. So he
Mhm.
came with his own challenges.
Mhm.
It was like, and I didn't know it at the time, but me with all of my insecurities, my self esteem issues, him with all the baggage from his environment,
Mhm.
um, we were a perfect storm for a
Mhm.
disastrous relationship,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And that's, we were together for like 9 years, but we probably had, I'd say, 4 good years, and then it was up and down and on and
Mhm.
off, and
Mhm.
and so that relationship ended when I was 4 months pregnant.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and he walked away from all the responsibility, and suddenly, yeah, I am having to start over again. But this time, I've got a baby in the belly.
Mhm.
I'm going on maternity leave. I know that I'm going on maternity leave in a few months' time, and I'm like, and he walked. We had a home together. He walked away from that. It sold at a loss, and I was left with a debt.
Mm.
So I'm like, oh my God, I got $50,000 debt on my head. I'm about to slow down in my income because I'm about to go on maternity leave, and there's a child in my belly. So there was that for me was the rock bottom,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I'd lost everything I'd worked for. I had worked a couple of jobs to get that house to start off
Mm.
with. Now
Right.
I'm losing everything that I've worked for, and I'm like, how do I start over again with this kind of mess?
Mhm.
But um, I suppose part of the resilience kicked in. So one of the first things I did was put myself into counseling,
Mhm. Mm. Yes.
because I was like, okay, how did you create this mess? I'm a reasonably intelligent woman. How did I end up here? And I think my psychologist at the time did the best thing for me that anyone could have done for me, because she only indulged me in my woe is me story for probably 2 sessions. The first
Mhm.
2 sessions was the woe is me story. She let me get it all out. I'm crying and I'm blaming him and all of this, and I'm carrying this baby. I'm 5 months pregnant at this stage. And then she said to me, she said, well, where did you play a role in this
Mhm.
situation in your life? And at the time, I was so angry and so affronted at the question,
Mhm.
because I
Yes.
was like, it's not me, it's him. He did this. And she goes, well, how did you attract someone like that in your life?
Mhm.
And I was like, oh. And she said, I want you to go home, and I want you to, she said, you love writing, so I need you to go and write something about this.
Mhm.
But I don't want you to censor it. I don't want you to try and explain it away. I want you to just freestyle write whatever
Mhm.
comes to mind. All the feelings, all the stuff, the anger, whatever's there, I want you to write it out, because she said, you're going to find the answer in that.
Mhm.
And I did find the answer in that rant and rambles and whatever. And it was pages and pages and pages
Yeah.
long.
Right.
And what I realized was that I had come into the relationship with my wounds, my scars, my baggage, and he had come into the relationship with his.
Mhm.
And we were a perfect storm.
Right.
It was actually never going to succeed,
Mhm.
right? There was healing
Right.
he had to do from his trauma from the Harlem days and the challenging life he grew up in. And there was
Mhm.
healing that I had to do.
Yes.
But what I also recognized was I was not going to have my child come into that environment.
Mhm.
And that was really, she, in many ways, has been the driving force behind every decision I made after that.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was always, what do I want to teach my daughter? And what I wanted to teach her was that she didn't have to be a woman, a child growing up in a victim mentality either. That yes, crappy stuff happened to people all the time,
Right. Right.
but you need to get out of that. You need to lift yourself. You can cry for a bit. We all need to experience our emotions. So you need to do that.
Right.
But
Yes.
then you need to go find someone that's going to help you lift you out of that negative
Right.
spaces.
Right.
And that's what the psychologist did for me. And then the other thing was like, okay, I need to make some money. I've got to figure out how to pay this debt and how to raise this kid. And so
Yes.
then I started like, who are the people that can influence that? Well, the
Mhm.
hiring people, the recruiters can influence that. And so I went and started to talk to these people. I started booking coffees with recruiters, booking coffees with hiring people in corporate organizations, and picked their brains. I asked them, I said, I'm coming to you because I need a mentor. I need someone to show me the way. Most
Mhm.
of them, I will say, back in those days, this is 20 something years ago, were incredibly generous with their
Mhm.
knowledge and their time. The
Mhm.
ones who were coaches who were charging, I would ask them. At the time, I couldn't afford them because I'm trying to pay off this debt and all of that. And I would say, what is your fee? And they would tell me the fee. And I said, how long is that fee valid for? And they said, for the next 12 months. I cut out everything,
Mhm.
dinners, movies, you name it. I started saving because I was like, I'm
Mhm.
determined to work with that coach. That means I need to raise the money.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it was about investing in myself
Mhm.
and
Yes.
sacrificing to be able to afford whoever's fee, whatever coach I decided I was going to work with at that particular time. And then, as I said, writing was always a way I got through. And so I started to play around with my resume, write, rewrite, test the market, use the information the recruiters and the hiring people were giving me, creating a framework and testing it in the market. And I think it was 7 months after I started that journey, I landed the first interview. That was a different kind of interview for a completely different kind of job that was paying a lot more money than I was earning. I
Mhm.
didn't get that job, but I asked them for feedback. I said, can you tell me how I can improve? There again, they were generous. They gave me feedback. A lot of recruiters and hiring people don't give you feedback, but these
Mhm.
people did. So
Yes.
I went and adapted and practice and practice and practice because I had obviously found a way to get the interview because my documents were strong, but
Mhm.
I didn't pass the interview.
Mhm.
Then I'm like, okay, here's my next way to improve. And so I started, practicing and then landed another opportunity about a month after the one where I was rejected. And I got that job. And
Yes.
that job paid double what I needed to make. I had set my figure
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
got double that increase. And I was like, yes, I have,
Yeah.
there's something here. And so and then people who knew me, obviously, um, they knew the story, they knew where I'd come from, they knew the rock bottom that I'd hit. They started coming for help.
Mhm.
They just said,
Mhm.
would you help me? And I'm like, yep. And so I had the corporate role that I landed, which was a high paying role. And then I was starting to help my friends and my colleagues and my family members. And that's how the reputation got out there, was that I had a
Mhm.
system that could
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
And that was my starting over journey. I never looked
Yes.
back after that.
Yes.
Went
Yes.
from strength to strength.
Right. And I think it's so cool that the lesson you taught your daughter, what you wanted to teach your daughter, is also what your dad taught to you
Taught
about
me.
not being a victim. Right, right. So I think that is so incredibly important for us all to fully realize that for any obstacle we're going to face, whether it is apartheid, whether it's racism, whether it is being in debt, whether it is any disruption, to go through this process of healing, to
Yes.
acknowledge the emotions, Acknowledge the anger, the sadness, whatever it is that you're feeling, acknowledge that, but don't succumb to that and become a victim of it. And
Yes.
constantly ask yourself why and how can I, and really begin to create your own solution and become your own solution. And you have mastered that and become a solution for other people, in that you were
Yes.
able to translate what you did for yourself into a business where now you do that for other people and help them to do that for themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people always say, I mean, I was a single mom heading into this big, high paying corporate roles. And what I was told was that, oh my God, you're never going to be able to do that as a single mom.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
when I went into the interviews, when I got that first opportunity and I got that role that jumped my income by heaps, um, one of the things I said in the interview, I said to them, you do realize that I'm interviewing you as much as you interviewing me. And
Mhm.
here's what I need to know. What is your support for single moms? I said, because
Mhm.
I know I can deliver your projects, but I also want to be a very good mother to my daughter. And so I
Mhm.
need to know that I'm supported in that. Because if
Mhm.
I'm not, you're not the right company for me. And it was a
Right.
risk. But the thing is, sometimes you've got to be bold enough to ask the question.
Right. Right. You've got to
Um,
ask the question,
you
advocate for
got to
yourself.
ask the question. And I got the job and I got the support. Here's the important thing. I got the support. And what I did with them was I say, let's trial it for 3 months. So you also, when you're coming to a negotiation table, you need to be able to offer them something as well. You can't
Mhm.
just
Right.
demand and take and want. So I was
Mhm.
like, this is what I need to be able to be a great mom to my daughter, but also to be a successful career woman. And here's what I have to offer. Can we trial it for 3 months and have a conversation in 3 months and see how we go?
Mhm.
And then I was like, now I need to go to work to deliver.
Right.
I need to show
Right.
them that I can do this, that I can be
Right.
the single mom and I can be the successful woman. And I delivered above and beyond. So by the time
Right.
we came back to the negotiation table 3 months later, they gave me what I wanted without a
Mm.
problem. Without a
Yes.
problem. I was working from home 20 something years ago, long before it became fashionable to work from home, because
From
that's what
home,
I
right.
asked,
Yes.
right? That's what I
Yes.
asked for. And I help my clients now. I say to them, don't ever think that you can't get what you want.
You have to ask
Have
for it.
you asked for
Yeah.
it?
Right, right, right. Because you definitely don't get what you don't ask for,
That's right.
or if you are unable to show value, and that is also another message I hope that our audience really takes away from this conversation is when you bring something to the table, when you are able to contribute value, that is an exchange. It's not just I'm going to give you my value and get nothing in return. Because obviously we get our check, we
Yes.
get our wages. But I was speaking with a colleague earlier today just about how even sometimes we'll get paid, but we'll still be underpaid in relation
Correct.
to the value that we're bringing. And when we see ourselves in in that position, we have to again advocate for ourselves and demand to get the compensation that represents the value that we're bringing. So
Yeah. And
yes.
one of the ways you can easily demonstrate your value is to do the trial period. three
Mm-hmm.
months is a good time frame to show someone what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to work and you do it. And I've seen people get, and I always say to my clients when they're negotiating salaries, I say to them, know the value of that particular role. So, for example, if you're going for a project manager role, know the ballpark range of what project managers get paid,
Mm-hmm.
negotiate somewhere in the middle so there's room for you to grow. Right, you're gonna learn on the job, and then you can constantly grow in the role. Never
Mm-hmm.
negotiate lower than the middle range, because then you're
Mm-hmm.
underselling yourself, right?
Right.
Middle of the
Right.
range is the way to go, but so that you give yourself room to grow into a senior project manager and get the
Mm-hmm.
next 10,000 or the next 20,000, whatever. Um, but you need to deliver. You cannot ask for something and then not deliver, because if you don't deliver, your value will sink really quickly, and you
Right.
gain the reputation then of someone
Right.
who is not able to deliver. And the world is too small in the areas of employment. People know people. Recruiters know recruiters. They
Hmm.
pass people around. Business people pass people around. Opportunities. So much happens through the network that if you tank your
Hmm.
reputation, it is tanked almost
That's
forever.
that. Right. Right.
So don't
Right.
tank your
Well,
reputation.
right, right. It's important to walk it like you talk it. So you can't
That's right.
say that that you are of value and then don't deliver. Wendy, as I knew when we spoke for the first time, I guess what 2 or 3 weeks ago now, I knew we would have a great conversation. And certainly we are well into a great conversation, but we are at the bottom of the hour, I suppose, or maybe a little bit more. And I want to get to some of the kind of typical questions that I ask of my living leaders.
Yes.
And then of course we will end with sharing how people can find out more about you and your company and the great things that you're doing. But you've really kind of shared this throughout as we talked about your journey thus far. But I always like to ask specifically, how do you live life in the end, or how are you living life in the end? And of course, living life in the end is using the power of our choices to get everything we desire in life. That's what it
Yeah.
boils down to. But if you were to describe how you are living life in the end, what would you share with our audience?
So for me, I've always wanted to travel the world and have the career and so on and so on. And but for a long time, I thought, well, I need to stay put in corporate, and I'm going to have to work a certain way, and I only get to travel, for 2 weeks of the year or something like that. But when I moved out of corporate, so this was the first move I made, and I made this when I hit menopause. So I will
Mhm.
preface that by saying that was another very difficult time I entered in my life. I did not expect it to hit me so hard. And
Yeah.
it hit me harder, and it came earlier than I thought. So in my head, it was supposed to happen in my 50s. It happened at age 45.
Oh
So I
wow.
was
Yeah.
very unprepared for it. But it also was the catalyst for me to really take a look and go, okay, what's the next thing that I want to do for my life? Because corporate was wonderful. I was in a high paying corporate job. And it's very easy to become used to that type of money. But
Hmm.
there's sometimes a price you pay for that kind of money.
Oh yes.
Stress was one of the biggest uh, payment that I was making, personal stress. Then I get hit with menopause, all of the, brain fog, insomnia, everything's happening. I'm running these huge projects that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm like, this is not working anymore for me.
Hmm.
Um, but I also have the side business of working with people around career and that. And so I'm like, I already have something that I love doing.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
was scared to make the shift because I'm sitting there going, believing that I can't have it all. And then I was like, no, 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 who says so? Like, you don't know that until you actually step into it. And so then I made the decision to leave corporate. Now, the first year of business, because now I'm going from a part time business to a full time business, and I've got to generate the business myself.
Right.
That wasn't easy, but I had thought through it prior. So I had savings, I had
Hmm.
created savings. And so I was like, I can test the market a little bit and see how we're going. What I did was just offer a lot of people a lot of advice. So I started to build my LinkedIn profile, and
Hmm.
people started to know me as the expert. And I would just give that advice. But it started drawing the people to me. They could see that I was willing to give first.
Hmm.
And when people started coming, they would listen to my videos, they'd look at my posts, and then they came and they said, how can I work with you? And I would always give people some information, some tips, some guidance, and then I leave the decision to them. So I think if you give first, you get.
Hmm. Yes.
In and amongst that whole, while I was making that transition, I was like, how do I get to travel and do my business? And then, the universe always provides when you ask a question,
Oh,
and if you
yes.
ask it sincerely. And I was traveling with my daughter through Europe, and so I had left on my, my email notification that I was out of the country, this, that, and the other. And then one day I get a WhatsApp message, because whenever I travel, I always leave my clients with my WhatsApp so they can, in case they need. And they
Mm-hmm.
know that when I'm traveling, I'm not going to do work. But however, one of the clients landed an interview, and it was for a dream job. And I'm in Paris at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
he sends me this WhatsApp and he goes, I know you're traveling, but I have an interview in 3 days and I'm really scared and I need some help. He said, I
Mm-hmm.
really want this job. And I was like, you know what? I can help him. So I'm sitting on the steps of the Sacre Coeur coaching this client.
Yeah.
We're doing interview practice and all of that. We did 3 sessions. So we did two when I was in Paris. I think I'd left Paris and gone to Amsterdam. And we did the second one, the third one, third practice. And then he goes and he does the interview and he gets the job.
Mm-hmm.
And he was ecstatic.
Yes.
And he's sending me these messages. Oh my God, he said, I thank you so much for taking the time and taking time out of a holiday. And suddenly it dawned on me, I'm like, oh my God, I can travel and coach.
Yes. Yes.
And I
Look at
was like,
there.
wow. And that
Wow.
is, in fact, how that opened up for me. And I do,
Mm-hmm.
I don't limit myself. I will say to some clients, I'm not available for this times. And I don't do a lot of the writing work when I'm traveling. But if my clients need interview coaching, that is something I know I can't delay. Because if they get
Mm-hmm.
an interview on Monday next week and they're calling me, WhatsApping me Monday this week, I have to make the time for them because we've got to
Right.
practice between now and the next Monday. So I
Right.
do make the time for them. But the thing is, word of mouth. Suddenly they
Right.
are promoting you everywhere. They're like, she's available. And if even when she's traveling, she will help you and so on and so on. And then clients start coming from everywhere. Referrals
Right.
mostly is my business now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. And I realized it didn't have to be an or life. It could be the and life. I
Right.
can coach,
Right.
I can do my work, and I can travel the world as well.
Yes. Wonderful.
Um,
Wonderful. And I'm glad that you illustrated it in that way to show that, when you are open and agile, you are truly able to live your life at the end because you can seize an opportunity to do what you desire in a way that allows you to combine, those aspirations as opposed to thinking you can only do one thing or the other. So that is a
yeah,
wonderful illustration. That's a great illustration of living life in the end. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, pleasure.
So one of the things that I always want women who are listening to the Living Litas sessions or episodes is to know how to make CEO moves. And so I want to close out with asking you how you make your CEO moves, and then we will do the final, like, 10 little quick questions where you just give the answers that I ask of each guest. But, CEO moves includes your circle of influence, empowering others, empowering yourself for elevation, and operationalizing what you learn to optimize outcomes. You can tell I like alliterations. So, how do you cultivate your circle of influence?
My circle of influence was cultivated through the work that I did in corporate already, and I kept those relationships and networks alive even when I left corporate.
Mm-hmm.
So I will always say to people, leave on a good note. If you're going to make
Mm-hmm.
changes in your life, never burn bridges, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the work that I get now has come from ex-bosses who trust me, who know that I delivered for them. Then they saw how I helped elevate people's careers even while I was working for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they often send people to me. Some of my
Mm-hmm.
clients that come from the ex-bosses I used to work with. They go, you need to go through her coaching first before you try and apply for a job with me.
Yeah.
Keep the networks alive.
Mhm,
In
mhm,
the space of jobs, for example, the best jobs, the most prime, juiciest, highest paying roles occur in the networks. They are not
mhm.
advertised. I've
Right,
seen
right.
this through my 20 something years of coaching. So build the network. Don't
Mhm,
People are reticent about building networks and connections. But that is where you're going to get the opportunity. And that applies across the job space, but also across any kind of business.
Right,
Learn
right,
to cultivate relationships with people who are like minded, who are open, generous, and who are about uplifting others. Because you
right,
always, opportunities are golden in that space.
right, right.
Um, Also, I will say one of the strong CEO moves that I make is that I've learned, and I had to learn this over time. It wasn't something that was natural for me. Learn what to say no to. Your
Yes,
no
yes.
is as important as
Yes,
your
sure,
yes.
yes. Yes. Ah, say that. That is so important. That is so important. So, what is a way that you elevate yourself or empower yourself for elevation? How do you empower yourself for elevation?
For me, I keep the mind as serene as I can. So I practice meditation,
Mm-hmm.
yoga. Um, I pause and reflect.
Mm-hmm.
Even with all of this, the madness that has gone on in the past week and the emotions that one starts processing, I always try to keep an open mind and
Mm-hmm.
to not.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, one of the things I said earlier is that I'm constantly checking my own biases, and that's in the workforce, that's in business, that's in politics, that's
Mm-hmm.
it, because it's easy for us to go, this is why someone did something. But how do you really know?
Mm-hmm. Right,
Have
right.
you actually asked the person? Are you
Mm-hmm.
curious enough and open minded enough to ask the question? So, one of the ways you elevate yourself is to be open, open to learning, open to challenging your biases, and open to potentially changing your point of view.
Right, right. And then
That's where
finally,
I've seen
yes,
power.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And then how do you operationalize what you learn to optimize your outcomes? Because a lot of us collect information, we're very smart, we know a lot, but how do we operationalize it or how do you do that?
Well, for me, it's about taking action. So, even if you only take one action step, my
Mm-hmm.
motto is take one small action daily. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't, it doesn't matter in what space you take it, but if you take an action towards improvement, it's going to spill over into the various areas of your life. So for me, when I was trying to get healthy and fit again, I went for a walk around the block.
Mm-hmm.
That took me 5 to 7 minutes. And then the next week, I walked 10 minutes around
Yeah.
the block.
Yeah.
And then I
Right.
walked, and now I walk 45 minutes around. We live next to a walking trail, and I'm on the trail with the dog every day.
Mm-hmm.
So you build the action steps. People think to make huge change, they have to take huge action.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've never seen that actually work. I
Right.
see
Just
that if you take
small things.
little action steps, because
Yeah.
then it spills. Once you get a win here, you suddenly go, oh, I think I want to do
Do
something
it
around
there.
my career. Oh, I think I want to do something around my finances. And you
Yeah.
keep taking one small step, and before it, your steps are compounding, and
Right.
it's
Right.
spilling over into all the areas of your life that you say you want to improve in.
Yes. Yes.
Take the action.
Right. Take the action. That's so important. So, this has been a great conversation. And as you know, the Living Life in the End series is a quest to find out how women can have it all. And over the course of this series, I will interview 100 women to have provocative conversations about how they're living their lives in the end. And not only is this a great conversation, but a quest for the Holy Grail. What does a successful life mean to the modern day woman? And this research project, wearing a fabulous conversation, poses the same set of questions to each woman to get her definition of success for being the CEO of her own life. And at the end of the series, I will compile all these answers and share how we all can be successful and fulfilled. So there are no right or wrong answers. So I'm going to ask you 10 quick questions and you just share the first thing that comes to mind. Doesn't need to be anything long or expansive, but just share what your thoughts are. So the first question is, what does femininity mean to you?
Femininity for me is owning my power as a woman without diminishing the power of a man.
Oh, ooh, that's good. Whew, that was good. All right, number two. What does feminist mean to you?
Um, I don't know how to define it because it's changed over the course of time, but it would probably be the same answer as the first answer.
Hmm.
Like, I
Hmm.
feel a true feminist makes space for all.
Yeah, great, great. And do you see perceive feminists as positive or negative?
In the modern world, it could be both.
Hmm.
I think it could be both. It depends
Yeah.
on how you project. If you're a feminist that is projecting in a way that's diminishing a man, a male, I don't think that's positive for society.
Hmm.
I think, but if you're a feminist that sees the value of the two working together in partnership, then I
Yeah.
see that as valuable. And that's probably the kind of feminist I am.
Oh, great. What are the characteristics of a good woman?
A good woman, so for me, a good woman knows how to take care of herself and knows how to lead a man to the answers she wants him to have without putting him down.
Ah, that's great.
Lead
That's,
him.
yes, yes.
We have certain gifts. And in the olden days, they used to call it feminine wiles or anything like
Hmm.
that. And it used to carry a negative connotation. I don't see it as a negative connotation. I see that women have powers, gentle powers. And if
Hmm.
you're smart, you can lead a guy to a really profound answer without him even realizing that you're the one that led him there.
Yeah. Right. What are the characteristics of a good mother?
Being available.
Ah, great,
I
great.
found that that was the case for me. I needed to be, and this is available for yourself and your own growth and empowerment, but also available for your child. They don't
Yes.
need all the stuff we think they need, material
Right.
stuff. They just need you to be available to them.
Yes. Great. Right. What are the characteristics of a good leader?
For me, it's about empowering others to think for themselves, to think
Hmm.
critically, giving them the opportunity to make a mistake without
Oh,
fearing making a mistake.
yeah. That's good. That's good. What does it mean to have it all?
Look, it depends on what having it all means for you. For me, having it all is I want to work and do purposeful work, hard work that helps others while I'm traveling the world.
All right.
So
Great.
if you're having it all is something else, I want to say to people, you can have it all. Just define what
Oh,
it is
yes.
for you and go after it.
Yes. Yes. Do you think women can have it all? I think you just
Absolutely.
alluded to that. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. What does fulfillment mean to you?
Doing work that I love and work that I know makes a difference and is elevating other people. It's one thing to make money, but if you have no one to share it with or you're not contributing something of value, it doesn't mean all that much.
Right. Right. And then finally, what does a successful life mean to you?
It's about having enough money not to be filled with anxiety around finances, having
Hmm.
enough money to be able to travel the world, and then also defining how I want to work in the world, not
Mm,
being driven by society's parameters, knowing the hours I want to work. I do work the hours I want to work, knowing when I want to take time off, all of those things. Fulfillment is about being able to do the work that makes a difference while also being paid to do the work that makes the difference.
great. Great. Well, this has been just such a great conversation. I'm so glad that we have had a chance to share your
Me too.
experiences with the audience. And of course, we want to make sure that they can follow you. And if they want to work with you, can know where to find you. So if you will just share how people can find you. Where in the world is Wendy Alexander?
So I live in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia, but you can find me on my website, which is happycareerhub.com. And
Great.
also on LinkedIn, it is where I give a lot of my tips around career success, career transition. So that's where I do all my free tips, and that's Wendy A. Alexander. So I'm on LinkedIn at Wendy A. Alexander. Wendy Alexander was taken, so I had to use my middle initial to
Yes.
get that handle.
You know, that's the same thing for me. So I'm officially Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes because there's another Dr. Stephanie Barnes. I think she
Barnes.
does creative writing or something like that, but same thing. Same thing. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And I do hope that everyone looks for Wendy on LinkedIn and definitely goes to her website. So if you are looking for your next opportunity and need an expert to refine you for that, you definitely now know someone to reach out to. So thank you so much, Wendy, for
Oh,
sharing
it's
with
been
us.
an absolute
And
pleasure.
this was a great conversation. I don't want it to end, but we do have to be respectful of our time and of
Yes,
that, yeah, of our audience. But thank you so much.
pleasure.
So
It's been
I
wonderful.
yes, 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 yes. I hope that you enjoyed this Living Leaders conversation. As always, I want you to feel something. I want you to learn something. Most of all, I want you to do something. It's time for you to make CEO moves, create your circles of influence, educate and empower yourself to elevation, and operationalize what you learn to optimize your outcomes. Whether you report to a CEO or are a CEO of your own business, you are always the CEO of you. Capitalize on your most powerful asset, the power of choice, to create extraordinary outcomes in your life, the power to create the life you desire and deserve. And remember, power is not in the conversation, but in the action that you take. Don't just talk about it, be about it. Don't wait. Wait broke the scale. Now is the time to do what you know needs to be done. Your life is the product of your choices. Choose to live your life in the end. This episode was brought to you by the Successful and Fulfilled Woman New You Transformation, a VIP day for the high achieving woman who is ready to be successful and fulfilled. If you are a woman who feels burned out and uninspired, or you are a woman ready to start over after a divorce, death, or other disruption, or you are a mother whose children are ready to leave the nest or are already gone, and you are now ready to create a meaningful life for yourself, or you are a woman who's approaching your golden years and you want the next half to be the best half, or you are a woman who's ready to get more out of life and ready to stop marking time and start living life, then we need to have a revelation conversation. Go to www.everythingideserve.com to schedule your complimentary revelation conversation, where together we will talk about where you are now and where you want to be, and begin to develop a plan to get you where you desire to be. You will leave your revelation conversation understanding the first thing that you can start doing today to begin living a successful and fulfilled life. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living Life in the End for the Successful and Fulfilled Woman. Please be sure to let me know what made you feel something, what you learned, and what moved you to action. Please subscribe so you don't miss out on a great conversation. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast and let me know how you are living life in the end. Life is too long to be unfulfilled. Don't keep all this goodness to yourself. Tell someone else to listen for themselves. We should all be fulfilled. Remember, your life is the product of your choices. Choose to commit to bringing the desires of your heart to completion. You don't get what you deserve until you get what you decide. Life is too long to be unfulfilled.